Good evening, I'm Chris Nachkite. Welcome to a special edition of APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. A book written over 4 decades by a residential school and domestic violence survivor was launched this year. In 1 second at a time, Diane Morisseau tells her story of resilience with the help of co-author Elizabeth Brannigan. APTN Sarah Bettens has the story.
I'm happy. I never thought I would say that. I'm happy. I'm grateful to be alive.
On Wednesday evening, dozens gathered to celebrate the launch of Diane Morisseau and Elizabeth Brannigan's book, 1 Second at a Time. In it, Morisseau shares her story of struggle, healing, and resilience as a residential school and domestic violence survivor. The book was a work in progress for decades. She began writing in the early 1980s after getting into a 12-step self-help program.
I did a lot of work on myself, trauma. I had to do a lot of healing to be strong enough to do this. It was very, very difficult, opening wounds, old wounds.
A few years ago, Morisseau met Elizabeth Brannigan when they worked together at a treatment center in Seguin First Nation. They soon became friends, and later, co-authors.
She shared a little bit of her struggles with finding someone who could help her write the story. And while I wasn't a writer, I had a dream to write, and I offered to try.
When she's not writing, and even though she is retired, Morisseau still helps people like her get on the path to healing. By sharing her story with the world, she hopes her words will help victims of violence know they are not alone and that a better future exists.
I know this was meant to happen, and I always hope, even after I'm gone, it will help someone. That's my dream.
Sarah Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To Yellowknife now, where books have the ability to allow readers to see the world through a different lens. The 19th annual Northwards Writers Festival wants to emphasize the power in this by bringing together feminist authors to challenge women's roles shaped by colonization and the patriarchy. Our reporter Charlotte Morup-Jacobs has the story.
Golden Eagle is proud to share her gift of storytelling. The Cree writer and broadcaster is one of several authors at the 2024 Northwards Writers Festival in Yellowknife that took place over the weekend.
Indigenous feminism is right at the forefront of any story I create in terms of my fiction writing and my poetry. And it is so important that Indigenous women have the ability as writers to put ourselves at the table, for a long time, because the balance was upset within what you would call a traditional Indigenous society before settlers moved to Canada. Women were very important, and then European men didn't want to deal with us, and so it upset the balance, and now we're taking that back. We're saying
Golden Eagle is sitting in on the panel for Indigenous Feminism and Literature, joined by authors Benita Noel, Tanya Snow, Erica Doring, Lafferty, and Helen Knott.
What I'm wanting to do, as always, is Indigenous women writers, be fearless. Don't worry about what people are going to think, because a lot of the things you might want to talk about are provocative, as they should be. This is how we build. And yeah, that's it. I like you to be a rebel. Thank you very much.
Panelists discuss how the written word is a tool for the decolonization of gender, race, and class.
And I feel like we need the word feminism in order to make visible what is not heteronormative patriarchy. Because heteronormative patriarchy is stolen land, it's stolen bodies, and it's stolen story.
Indigenous feminism is an intersectional theory and practice of feminism that focuses on decolonization, Indigenous sovereignty, and human rights for Indigenous women and their families. And that focuses on empowering Indigenous women in the context of Indigenous culture values and priorities rather than mainstream non-Indigenous patriarchal ones.
Award-winning author Helen Knott is known for her 2 memoirs, framing resilience, grief, and identity. She says the more she writes, the freer she becomes, and she encourages Indigenous creatives to put pen to paper.
Even if you get that urge or inkling to write, I feel like story is always following us places and wants to come into the world. So if you feel that little tap, we always have a lot of voices in our head saying like we're not worthy, or it's not the right time, or we don't have the right skill set, to just be willing to answer that call, because story will meet you when you step out to meet it. And it ends up being this like reciprocal relationship when it comes to story. So I would say just be brave.
Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
A new graphic novel hopes to show that there isn't one right way to grieve after a family member goes missing. The story Little Moons explores the emotions that can come up while waiting for answers. Sav Jones has sat down with author Jen Storm to find out more.
When a loved one goes missing, your heart searches for them everywhere.
I had lost somebody in an MMIW scenario, and I felt a lot of those things. Like I felt like there was a presence. I would feel like lights flickering, and you're just looking for that connection also, I think. So I really wanted to write about that experience.
Upcoming graphic novel Little Moons explores the different ways grief can affect the relatives of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Ojibwe author Jen Storm says though the story isn't based on her personal experience, it's a subject that's all too common within the Indigenous community.
Grief was important to me because I think that was a really hard thing for me to experience, and I know it's hard for other families to experience that have to deal with MMIW because not everyone's found, right? And so there's this like weird grief that you go through, I think. When you're expecting the worst news, you kind of already know, but you don't have the answers or the mourning or the body or whatever it is.
Through vivid colors and thought-provoking illustrations by Ryan Howe and Alice R.L., Little Moons follows 13-year-old Rihanna while she watches her immediate family deal with the disappearance of her older sister, Chelsea. Rihanna feels abandoned by her mother, who leaves their reserve to live in the city when emotions get too difficult to handle.
If you lost a daughter, you know what I mean? Like, you don't know what would go through your mind or how you would cope, or maybe that's the best she could do. Yeah. So it's like, I kind of wanted that to be in there because I know people don't react ideally, they react humanly.
Despite the pain, there's also hope found within Little Moons. Rihanna finds strength and comfort in connecting with spiritual practices.
It was really important to me for the main character to really have that connection to her community and her traditions, and to find comforts, and then also have that parallel of her mother who felt she had to run away from it.
Storm says the title was inspired by her own son's experience of seeing her late childhood friend.
My son was, I think, 2, not even, and he was in his crib, and I went up to him and he was saying, I saw Auntie, and he's never met her. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean you met Auntie? And he's like, she was here, like, and he kept, like, he was insisting. And I just kind of played along, and I was just like, well, what did Auntie look like then? And he was like, she looked like Little Moons. So that was like, oh.
Storm hopes that Little Moons can be a resource for any person, young or old, who is struggling with losing a loved one. Readers can find it on store shelves when it comes out September 3rd. Sav Jones, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
We have to take a short break, but when we return, we'll tell you about a number of language books experts say were created with AI with many errors in it. That story when we come back. Welcome back. A woman from Fox Lake Cree Nation in northern Manitoba just launched a resource book for Swampy Cree immersion learning in the classroom. She got the idea and the help from a well-known Anishinaabemowin speaker that also teaches at the University of Manitoba. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
Awas Ginasau, Swampy Cree for goldfish, the game these language trainees are engaged in. That's just one interactive example as to how to teach in Inuumuin in the classroom.
These games that we're using, there's a lot of laughter around them. There's competition.
Pat Niguans is a well-known Anishinaabe speaker who's published 17 Ojibwe language books through her company, Majanati Inc. She just finished helping Charissa Nolt with this Swampy Cree immersion handbook called Pigisquetan, meaning let's talk.
I wanted Pat's book to be translated into Inuumuin because we don't really have that. And when I started off as a learner, there was really no resources for me to learn off of. I had Pocket Cree, and then I had online dictionaries in Y dialect, but nothing really went over those complex grammar patterns and verb conjugations and stuff that happens in the language. So I learned a lot from my Anishinaabe learning friends.
Nolt says the book came to reality by accident after making a joke to Niguans at a language conference.
Had survival phrases and games, and the language in it was great, the dialogues, I just thought it was fantastic, and I was like, I need this in Inuumuin. So I was bugging her at the conference. I was like, Pat, I need it in Inuumuin. And I didn't think anything of it. And then I got an email a few weeks later from her saying, okay, do it then.
More than a year later, this resource guide has come to life. Nolt calls herself a second-hand learner because she grew up writing and reading the language in school, but didn't speak it. She did as much of the translation that she could on her own, then got her grandma and mom involved.
It was a lot of dialogues and the teachings and those encouragement phrases that, second language learners, we don't hear a lot naturally.
Niguan says that is what it's all about, to keep the language going, involving families and communities.
And I hope that happens again. I would like to see Dakota Immersion Handbook. That's the next thing I would like to see. They're losing their language too.
This Cree immersion book includes 2 months of lesson plans and activities for interactive learning. Like this game of baseball that even I'd take a swing at. Nearly miss. And recover to take first base. But more importantly, learn in Inuumuin. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Readers beware, a series of suspicious-looking and inaccurate Indigenous language books have been appearing on Amazon Marketplace. These appearances are raising questions about whether the books are being written by generative AI. APTN's Sarah Bettens investigates.
Thomas Bear claims to be a distinguished Plains Cree language expert from Canada and the author of several books. His bio celebrates his work in the community, sharing his expertise through workshops and seminars. But there's suspicion that Bear isn't who he claims to be, or if he even exists. A series of near-identical books on Amazon are generating outrage on social media. From Plains Cree to Ojibwe to Blackfoot, most look the same, only the author names are different. The author profiles go nowhere. The International Standard Book Numbers, or ISBNs, aren't real. One Facebook user said the Ojibwe book she bought was inaccurate, and some suspect the books were created using generative AI. To put Bear's Plains Cree book to the test, APTN reached out to language instructor Dr. Kevin Lewis from the Miniskewin Lake Cree Nation. Within seconds, he knew something was off. Most words were either inaccurately translated or completely made up.
I don't recognize that. Amuya would be like saying no. Nigan is forward or in the front. Oh yeah, it's off. I know it's off.
Professor David Gerhard heads the University of Manitoba's Computer Science Department. He says AI-generated books are common. And while they may look legit, they're often unreliable.
These generative tools, especially when they are working in domains where they don't have a lot of information, can sometimes just make up an answer rather than say they don't know. And so it's not clear whether the information in here would be reliable.
APTN plugged the introduction of Bear's Plains Cree Adjectives book into 3 AI detectors. While their accuracy can't be guaranteed, all 3 suggested the text was 100% AI generated. Gerhard notes a few other telltale signs.
You can do a search for these authors and find that they're not real people, but the big tell is that the ISBN, the international book number, is just made up.
Whether or not the language books are AI generated, someone somewhere uploaded them to the Amazon marketplace. And Lewis worries they could be dangerous.
There's a lot of people that are really want to learn their languages, the Indigenous languages. And then it's just a shame that somebody sort of capitalized on it in that way.
Gerhard says sellers face few, if any, consequences for uploading books like this.
I don't think there's any way that we can police this. I don't think there's any consequences we can bring on the people doing this. Instead, what we can do is educate the public and let them know that these things are out there and to be careful of the sources of the information that you get.
Not judging a book by its cover, Lewis believes these dubious texts underscore the need for more Indigenous language programs.
We need them all over the place because there's so many people that are living in the cities, in the towns, not only the First Nations or the settlements, Métis communities. We're everywhere now, right? And then if we can sort of get online and then start teaching these languages, then I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Tim Gilman, an Amazon spokesperson, said there are content guidelines for books sold on Amazon and that Amazon will remove non-compliant books and suspend publisher accounts for repeated abuse. Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing guidelines require authors to disclose AI-generated but not AI-assisted content. After APTN reached out to Amazon, Bear's Plains Cree book series was removed. However, dozens of similar books are still for sale. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A controversial columnist has apologized for his previous wrongs following the release of his new book. That story when we come back. A Manitoba columnist has written a book on Indigenous people called Treaties, Lies and Promises, How the Métis and First Nations Shaped Canada. For more than a decade, Tom Broadbeck wrote about Indigenous issues, but his opinions often upset Indigenous communities. At one point, chiefs in Manitoba accused him of racist thinking and asked for a boycott of the media organization he worked for. He's never spoken to APTN about his columns until now. T.R. Wheatley did a one-on-one interview with Broadbeck in Upper Fort Garry, an iconic place for the Métis Nation and a place he writes about in his upcoming book.
Well, thank you for being here with me. Can you just introduce yourself and what it is you do?
Sure. My name's Tom Broadbeck, and I'm a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press, and I've been a journalist for 30 years in Winnipeg.
So you're writing a book. Tell me a little bit about your book.
So the book is called Treaties, Lies and Promises, and it's a book about the contribution Indigenous people made to Manitoba and Canada, in particular Manitoba's entry into Canada. But it's also a book about how Indigenous people have been marginalized and excluded and dehumanized in many cases, and it gets into the stories that surround colonial governments and colonial settlers. And I don't think you can understand where we're at today for many complex issues without understanding those stories and knowing those stories. You don't have to be an expert on the Red River Resistance or the numbered treaties, but I think if you want to really understand where we're at as a province and a country, you really need to have a sense of what those stories were all about.
The underlying issue here people want to know is why you to write this, considering your background and some of the columns you've wrote about my people in the past.
I wrote an apology column in the Free Press a couple of weeks ago after I was called out on social media about some of the columns I wrote 10 years ago when I worked at the Winnipeg Sun. I'm ashamed of those columns that I When I read them today, I'm embarrassed by them. I've changed my views after educating myself and learning more and talking to Indigenous people.
I mean, many people called you a racist. Would you consider yourself?
I don't, no, and I don't think I ever have been, but I drew wrong conclusions about issues such as missing and murdered Indigenous women inquiry, issues such as Gladue reports in court where the courts are being asked to consider the historical background of Indigenous offenders when sentencing. I drew wrong conclusions when the Canadian Museum of Human Rights offered Indigenous people free admission. And my conclusion was that people should never be treated differently based on their race, including Indigenous people who form a unique group of people within Canada. And I was wrong in that conclusion. And it was based on ignorance.
What's that pivotal point? I mean, you can't just go from calling out Indigenous people time and time again, and then just suddenly, hey, you know, I'm your ally now.
I accept that criticism. It's completely valid. You know, I don't think there was any one pivotal moment. There's been a journey that I've been on for the last 5 to 10 years that has slowly transformed my thoughts and my beliefs.
Do you ever think about your words and how they could have spewed hate in other people who already had it? Example, you know, we're in this city where they call it ground zero for missing and murdered Indigenous women. I mean, like, I could think of Sean Lamb, the recent Skibitsky. Like, they could have been using your words to fuel themselves. Do you ever think about that?
I do now. I didn't at the time, but I recognize now that those words and those columns fueled racist sentiment and gave people a license to think that way and to behave that way. That's part of the harm that I caused.
Any of the Indigenous community, have anybody kind of like helped you along the way with this book? Like kind of endorsing you and encouraging you?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Chief wrote the foreword for my book, and we've been friends for a long time and developed a relationship, and I've learned a ton from him. And we talk all the time, and he enlightens me on many things. I've been speaking with the MMF, the Manitoba Métis Federation. They're reading an advanced copy of the book, and I've talked to them a lot about these issues as well.
Have you reached out to, I could think of a few, Terry Nelson, who at the time when he worked at the Winnipeg Sun, as well as Chief Derek Nepenak, who were asking for a boycott of this this media place that you worked at because of your words?
Yeah. I haven't, but I would like to. I would like to keep reaching out. Yeah.
As somebody who likes words and stuff, it was definitely well worded, your apology. It almost reminded me, though, of the 2008 apology from Stephen Harper, where it was very like rehearsed, kind of like saying you're sorry, but you're not sorry.
It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't. It was genuine. It's emotional. It's very emotional for me. And all I can say is people can change their minds. People can be wrong, and it's okay to admit you were wrong. And I'm admitting that I'm wrong. I'm admitting I was wrong.
And that's your special edition of APTN National News. From our staff from across the country, hi miigwech masicho. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again.